Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. A very interesting episode. I just like the whole aesthetic of this episode. First of all, the title card. This episode was kind of interesting. I wonder if that's supposed to be kind of more of a reference to maybe something old school. I mean, obviously it's supposed to be like, oh, we're going back in time, so there's that aesthetic, but maybe it's also referencing something from the comic books, like when it comes to Archie comics. Maybe, maybe not. It immediately made me think of Saved by the Bell. Maybe that was the inspiration for it. I don't know. But I thought it was kind of an interesting thing, the whole aspect of basically each of the characters are playing, the actors are playing the younger version of their characters' parents. And I just thought that was kind of interesting. And it's like all of them ended up getting detention. They'd all actually kind of avoided each other. Now, something even interesting, because even Fred was like, we've known each other since like kindergarten, yet we know nothing about each other. We've gone to the same school since kindergarten, we know nothing about each other. And it's just because they weren't friends, which is crazy. And it was also interesting to see all these characters you've come to know so well over the course of these, well, 2 seasons so far, to kind of fully get to know, but to kind of see them when they were younger and very different from who they are now. It's like all these circumstances led to them becoming who they are now to a certain extent, because it's like for example, you take Penelope. Penelope was actually like, she was the bookworm, she was teacher's pet. It's like completely different person, kind of being kind of the evil, borderline manipulative person that she is. Same thing for like Hermione. Like, it's a whole bunch of stuff like that. I was wondering how like a lot of other people like tied into this, like, because it turns out like Reggie's dad is apparently a part of this. So it was Dilton's dad, hence how I guess how he kind of fell into this, because Reggie's dad, Dilton's dad, Tom, Sheriff Keller, as well as Hiram were secretly playing a game at the same time our group, known as the Midnight Club, were. It's actually kind of sad, a lot of their circumstances and stuff like that. Like, the fact of the matter is, Sierra, like her and Tommy were dating back then, which is like, oh, it kind of comes full circle, didn't it? To a certain extent, and it was kind of sad in the long run, because it's like, her parents had a problem her dating Tommy, just because different ethnicity, so it was kind of an issue on that front. Hermione was kind of tied between, like, her mom is like, oh, kind of like, what was it, like she cleans like hotel rooms or something like that, and it's like for Hermione she's kind of secretly dating Hiram, and it's kind of like, oh, he's kind of a bad boy, and her mom didn't appreciate that. The thing is, she didn't want her mom's life, so that's why the appeal of Hiram was so appealing. Fred was dealing with the fact of the matter is, like, obviously very reflective of Archie, in the sense of like his dad was sick, and he was like into music and sports, and he didn't want to leave Riverdale for multiple reasons, because it's like, hey, my dad is here, I don't want to leave him behind while he's sick. Well, also it's like Riverdale has everything I want. Then there's the whole Alice secretly being pregnant thing, and she never let FP know. I think because she held in that spite, because she was pissed at him, kind of like, because the only people who knew about her secret were Sierra and Hermione. And then the whole situation of like FP kind of telling his dark secret of being like, my dad wants me to join a gang, join the Serpents, but he's like, that's not me. I want to be the first Jones to go to college and stuff like that. And it's like, wow, you had those aspirations. Like, you had no want to join the Serpents. That was kind of interesting to me. I mean, to be fair, like, FP didn't want that path for Jug either. And I guess that's kind of the reason why, because it was kind of something that he didn't want in his own life. So, of course, he didn't want it for Jug. But it's so interesting to kind of get all those perspectives and stuff like that. And over the course of the time that they spent together, the people who didn't know each other grew to know so much about each other. There was even a whole point like where Penelope kind of playing the chaos role, split them up into the groups, even though she knew that she knew that FP wanted to go with Alice, and Hermione wanted to go with Fred. So just to kind of piss him off, she kind of switched the groups around, which is interesting, Fred and Alice kissed. It's like, that's crazy. I mean, it's because it's even crazier than the whole like FP and her being a thing, just because it's like, oh yeah, Jughead and Betty are a thing. And it turns out like, it's kind of interesting, because a lot of this was brought up previously about them being a lot of like couplings in the past. I don't know if the whole Tom and Sierra thing had come up. I mean, obviously that was kind of a secret affair type of situation. So Of course, that wouldn't come up, but like I'm pretty sure like Fred had mentioned the fact that him and Hermione had dated back in the day. Definitely, we already knew about the Alice and FP situation, but that was kind of interesting to me. The fact is that they kissed, and even Betty's like, wait, you and Fred? It was kind of crazy. But then the fact of the matter is, there's those fizz rocks that Hiram brought, which I'm curious, like, we never found out where exactly they came from, because literally the only person who didn't take them was Alice, because she was pregnant at the time. I wonder, was that like old school jingle jangle or something like that? Just because it's just interesting. Because it's such a small detail that never gets really fully, like, it plays a role in the episode, but it never comes back and like, oh, where did that come from? Like, no one asks, like, oh yeah, Hiram, where'd you get all these drugs from? It's like, no, we're not going to bring that up, so that's kind of interesting. Which is also funny considering the fact that Hiram's connected to the drug game now just because of like the ghoulies and stuff and the whole jingle jangle situation. So it's kind of interesting how that kind of plays out like that. Kind of let everything go because each one of them was running away from different aspects of their life. I didn't talk about the whole incest situation when it comes to the Blossoms with the whole Jason and Polly situation. Seems like that runs deep into Blossoms, and it's like not to be surprised because the Blossoms are all about like the perception of just this life of there. Because it turns out like Penelope actually grew up in the an orphanage and she was picked up by the Blossoms because she's supposed to be like a Blossom. She was first kind of brought in as Clifford's sister, but it's like, oh no, now you're going to grow up and you're going to become his wife. She was being basically conditioned to be his wife, which is kind of because of the whole, it's like they look specifically for a redhead. Cause remember like Clifford, like had white hair. His hair, he'd got the salt and pepper. And so he wore a wig to make it seem like he still had bright red, vibrant hair because that's what the Blossoms are. So they had to keep up that image. So that's what kind of played into that, which is like, even everyone else was like, really, dude, that's super messed up that that's happening to you. So like, that's what she was escaping. Every one of them was escaping something within their personal lives that playing the game made them feel better. That's what kind of seduced them even more because eventually it was like, oh, we don't need to bore it anymore. Let's role play in real life. Them also being on drugs kind of like set all that emotions. But Alice kind of brought up an interesting perspective of like, that brought out the monsters in us, or maybe the monsters were always there. Like, that's always been inside of them. It just took the drugs kind of bringing out that darkness, because like I said, I've talked about that before, like with Riverdale, it's kind of like, does the town bring out the darkness in the people, or do the people bring out the darkness in the town? Like, has it always been in the town itself and it just seeps into the people? It just makes you wonder, like stuff like that. So under these circumstances too, you had Featherhead, played by Anthony Michael, which he's been in quite a few things. I think the thing he's kind of best one on him for, at least I know him best for, is the Dead Zone TV show, which I've never seen that. I've seen bits and pieces here and there. Actually, that's a series I've always kind of had on my list that I need to go back and just like binge on the entire thing. But nevertheless, he had been missing for like a week, and I love that whole aspect because my impression was like, oh, they killed someone, which I guess indirectly Alice kind of feels like they did because they didn't say anything about him being missing because Penelope was like, we can't say anything because if people find out what we were doing, the whole Midnight Club situation, then that's going to lead to people putting us as the number one suspects. And so it was kind of, that's what their secret was about because it's like, we can't let anyone know especially at this point in time, especially if it's like, oh yeah, now that he found out that Featherhead was dead, and it's like, that's brutal. He basically been in the closet for like a week. It wasn't until flies start flying around that people, it's like, oh, it smells in here and there's flies everywhere. And it's like, oh, because his dead body was stuffed in the closet. It's like, that's pretty rough. And he had the blue on it. So it's like, that's where it all kind of comes together. This secret, like that they've kept buried this entire time. Because notice is something interesting. Maybe that came up, but like two people we've never seen come up in this situation, Dilton's dad, Daryl, and Reggie's dad. They were two other people involved in this whole situation. We haven't seen them come into this. But obviously there was a whole aspect of suspicion because like Alice is like, which one of you did it? It was like, why would you think any of us did it? You obviously had to be the one who done it because you were the only one that was kind of around at that time and stuff. And it's like, dude, kind of fingers pointing. And then Penelope and Daryl were kind of like, oh, honestly, we didn't set up the whole Ascension Night situation. Someone else had already set that up and sent us letters and stuff like that. And Alice is like, you do realize whoever set that up was trying to kill one, if not all of us, which begs the question, who would do that and why? I mean, the biggest thing is like it has to be someone amongst that group. I mean, to be fair, we know what we see what Hal's whole situation is. So maybe there was actually another killer that's been in Riverdale the entire time, and no one's really active. Because I mean, it seems like that was the only situation to come about because of that. Like, oh yeah, someone dying back then. It seems like Featherhead was the only one, but now we've got subsequent more victims of like Ben and Dilton. Obviously, Ethel was almost one, so it's kind of like it's escalated. But what I thought was so fascinating was because of this secret, it set these characters down the paths that they were on. They eventually kind of broke up and kind of went down their separate paths. And I guess rather because their bonds together, kind of like their friendship and obviously the game itself, it got a little intoxicating. That helped them get away from their respective situations. But because they broke up and didn't have that escape anymore, and because they didn't have each other anymore, they ended up going down their respective paths. Of Fred, because of everything that happened, Fred blamed himself because he wasn't there when his dad died, and it seems like that's a big role that kind of that's an aspect that plays heavily into Archie too, because Archie blames himself when he's not there when he's needed. So, but Fred gave up on his music dreams and started working for his family's company, Breaking Rocks. Penelope gave into the whole like situation of being Clifford. I thought it was kind of a nice, interesting detail, like the actor who played Jason, at least what it looked like. You didn't get a full-on facial view, but it looked like it was the same actor who played Jason played a younger Clifford. So I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of playing into that more. And it's just kind of interesting how like, and it's kind of a little sad because they were like, oh yeah, the teacher's pet ended up becoming the pawn. It's like she became who she was. Like you can see so much of like she was forced into a situation. She became the person she is now. Kind of the terrible person you chalk her up to be is because of her circumstances. I'm sure her circumstances are things that even Cheryl doesn't know about her, because it's kind of like, I'm sure Cheryl knew all of that about her mom. She'd probably be a little bit more sympathetic to her mom being who she is. It's kind of Hermione kind of gave into Hiram after that, and it's like, oh yeah, a lifetime of compromises. It's kind of like accepting a lot of what he did, just because it's like she went down that path and it just got to the point there was no turning back. Like obviously she didn't know he'd be all mobster up later on, but it happened that way and there was no turning back at that point in time. So Alice gave up her, tried to put her past behind her. She was trying to run from it, put up her serpent coat, and that's how she met Hal, which is like, that set her down the path she did. It's like she ended up hooking up with a serial killer, so there's that whole situation. And FP ended up joining the Serpents, becoming what he didn't want to become. Makes you wonder, like, that's the only people we didn't really, well, oh yeah, and Sierra and Tommy, it's like, oh, wait for me. They were going to wait for each other, but obviously they both went off and had their own kids and their respective situations, and now it's like, now they're back together again. So I guess in their situation, it kind of worked out, but it was a lifetime of being away from each other before it took them having an affair to kind of find their way back to each other, so... It is a long line of complicated situations with this. I was curious, like, what it seems that basically, obviously, it is something like Hermione had talked about at the beginning of the episode when she was talking to the classes and school people, the students at the school, of like, this game kind of feeds on people who, who are kind of lost, who are kind of in a mindset, like all of them. They were kind of in low points in their respective lives they were trying to run away from different things. And it's like, this can affect you, even though you think like, oh, because even Cheryl kind of put it like, oh, they're sheep and they're shepherds. Like it might affect the sheep, but not others. But it's like this game warps your reality essentially, and it kind of gets into your mind and your head. So it's definitely going to be interesting to go forward and see like how this affects the everyday students, because it seems like, even with people taking the game away from it, even though with the game being banned, like people are still going to play it nonetheless, because it's like, oh, it's banned. Like, oh, we're not supposed to play it. Oh my God, let's play it even more so, so we'll see where that ends up going. But it turns out that night that Featherhead had died, Alice had seen the chalices filled, so that means that it was potentially meant for one, like I said earlier, one of them to die. So it could have been any one of them. So that's where the suspicion lies even more, which makes the situation even sadder, because it's like you've been keeping this secret, a secret that one of the group might have been a murderer. And then she also saw the Gargoyle King like Jug and Betty did. So is that really the same person all these years later, or is it like the child of that said person? I don't know. I mean, we might. Well, because I'm about to say, would it be something like? I mean, whoever it was back then, this person right now might be trying to get revenge. This might be like, did Featherhead secretly have kids or something like that? I mean, that was never brought up, but it's like, is it someone trying to get revenge on his part? It's like trying to hurt all these people because it's like, oh, the person that was important to me, being Featherhead, was taken from me. Now I'm trying to get revenge, it's like the only, like, I don't know who did it, so I kind of have no choice but to do this to kind of get what I want, kind of type of revenge. I don't know. Because that was kind of my initial thought, like, whoever they potentially killed, this is like, the person behind all this could potentially be the child of that person getting revenge, but they never really brought up Featherhead having a kid. I mean, which, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know, maybe it was a secret that they just didn't know about. I don't know. So it's kind of nice to finally get that secret out there. It's not like it was drawn out the entire season. It's like, we finally got the story pretty ahead of time. To be fair, though, we're also getting Alice's perspective, which, maybe, Alice has her perspective on the situation, but I'm also sure, like, you always have to be careful with those type of things. I mean, the thing is, even Betty kind of went and vetted it because she went to the window into their room that they were in for detention and sees that, okay, they, like, where Alice had scrawled their initials. Okay, so there's truth to her story. So it's kind of like, because the thing is, like, for one, it's like you always get a person's perspective, and someone's perspective isn't always true to the exact situation because everyone experiences something different. So that was kind of my mindset on it. So, but it seems like for now, we'll take what Alice said 100% at truth. Maybe we'll find out later on there's some stuff that maybe she missed out on, doesn't remember, because remember, she left while everyone else was still there. What happened in that time frame from Featherhead showing up to everyone else? Did they leave around the time Alice did? Like, what? We never found out where they were when Featherstone was there. Were they still running around the school and he never caught them? Because they never said anything about being caught by him. So not unless one of them was caught by him and just kind of keeping it secret, because it's like, if I say that I was caught by him, I look suspicious and guilty, hence why they won't say anything. So we will see where all this takes us, because sadly at the end, Alice is like, promise me you won't play Betty, and Betty's like, I won't. And lo and behold, I was like, oh, the moment she said, I was like, Betty's obviously going to play. Lo and behold, she finds Jughead actually playing, and it turns out he's not alone. He's playing with some serpents. It looks like, from the glimpse, I think it was Tony and Sweet Pea were there, I think, were at least two of them. So that's definitely going to be complicated, especially because, Tony might convince Cheryl to play. So I'm very interested to get the family's reactions. Like, obviously, we haven't seen them together since they were like, we got to keep this even more secret. So now that Alice has told her truth, I wonder, will she tell the other parents that she told her truth? The people I felt like she'd most likely turn to, maybe Fred, FP. Maybe she would turn and tell the entire group. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that front. But I'm very interested to see where all this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good